The howling wind was deafening, like 1,000 voices screaming into the night. Inside the small cave, Jenna pulled her children closer, feeling their small bodies trembling against hers. Emily and Ben's faces were pale, their lips turning an alarming shade of blue. As the temperature plummeted, a terrible thought crystallized in Jenna's mind. This forgotten cave in the mountains might become their tomb. The tears freezing on her cheeks, she whispered a desperate prayer into the darkness. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. Just 3 days earlier, Jenna had packed everything they owned into their aging sedan. The divorce had been finalized for barely a month, ending years of emotional manipulation and heartbreak. This journey was supposed to be their fresh start, a new job waiting in a small town across the mountains, and perhaps a chance to rebuild the sense of safety that had been shattered. The weather forecast had mentioned snow, but nothing like the biblical storm that now raged outside. When their car had skidded off the isolated mountain road and the engine died with a final, sputtering cough, Jenna had felt the first real tendrils of fear. No cell service, no passing cars, just an endless white void and temperatures dropping rapidly as night approached. The small cave had seemed like salvation at first, shelter from the relentless wind and snow. But as hours passed and the cold penetrated their bones, Jenna realized with growing horror that they had merely traded one death for another, slower one. "Mommy, I'm so cold," Emily whispered, her 7-year-old voice barely audible over the storm. Her little brother Ben, only 5, had stopped complaining entirely, a silence more frightening than his earlier tears. "I know, sweetheart. Just stay close." Jenna's voice struggled for steadiness. She'd already given both children her spare clothes, her sweater awkwardly draped over Emily, her scarf wrapped multiple times around Ben's tiny frame. Her thin jacket provided little protection now, but she'd endure anything to buy her children a few more hours of life. The divorce had taken nearly everything: their home, their financial security, even some friends who'd chosen sides. But Jenna had her children, and that made her wealthy beyond measure. The irony wasn't lost on her that after fighting so hard to build a new life for them, they might not live to see it. "Tell us a story," Ben mumbled suddenly, his first words in over an hour. Jenna swallowed hard. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice cracking slightly, "there was a brave knight and his 2 squires who got lost in a magical winter forest." As she spun an improvised tale of adventure and magic, Jenna checked her watch. Nearly midnight, they'd been in the cave for 6 hours. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since sunset, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Her extremities had long since gone numb, and she quietly worked her fingers and toes, desperate to maintain circulation. "And then, what happened to the knight?" Emily prompted when Jenna fell silent, lost in her calculations of their survival chances. "The knight," Jenna struggled to continue. "The knight knew that they needed help, so he sent out a magical call, hoping someone would hear." "Like a prayer?" Ben asked, his eyes large in his pale face. "Yes, exactly like a prayer." Jenna pulled them closer, forming a tight circle of shared warmth. "Let's all send out a magical call together, okay?" It was a game to the children. But for Jenna, the whispered plea they sent into the darkness held the full weight of a dying mother's desperation. She thought of her own mother, gone 5 years now to cancer. "I'm sorry, Mom," she thought. "I tried to be strong like you taught me." Hours crawled by. The children drifted in and out of a dangerous sleep that Jenna fought to prevent, shaking them gently whenever their eyes stayed closed too long. Her own exhaustion was a physical weight, pulling her toward a slumber she knew might be permanent. "We need to stay awake," she murmured, pinching her arm hard enough to bruise. "Just until morning. Help will come in the morning." But even as she said it, Jenna knew it was a lie. The storm was predicted to last another day at least. No one knew exactly where they were. Their car was likely buried under snow by now. The statistical probability of rescue was vanishingly small. Emily stirred against her, small fingers clutching at Jenna's shirt. "Mommy, I think I see something." "It's just the shadows, honey," Jenna soothed, assuming her daughter was becoming disoriented from the cold. "No, look, at the cave entrance." Jenna raised her head slowly, conserving energy even in this small movement. At first, all she saw was the same scene that had tormented her for hours, swirling snow against absolute darkness. Then, a flash of movement, a shape distinct from the chaotic patterns of the storm, golden fur catching the faint moonlight, intelligent eyes reflecting like twin ambers in the darkness. A dog, a beautiful golden retriever, stood at the cave entrance, its posture alert but calm despite the raging storm. It tilted its head, studying them with an intensity that seemed almost human. "A dog?" Jenna whispered, wondering if hypothermia had progressed to hallucinations. The animal padded forward, its paws leaving wet imprints on the cave floor. It was real. Impossibly, wonderfully real. Ben extended a trembling hand. "Good doggy." The dog approached cautiously, allowing Ben's fingers to brush against its fur, then turned back toward the cave entrance. It looked over its shoulder at them, took a few steps out into the storm, then looked back again. "I think," Emily said slowly, I think he wants us to follow him. That's crazy, Jenna murmured, even as hope flickered to life in her chest. He's probably just a stray or a runaway. But the dog's behavior was too deliberate, too purposeful. It returned to them, gently tugged at Jenna's sleeve with surprising care, then moved again toward the entrance. He's trying to help us, Emily insisted with a child's absolute certainty. Jenna weighed their options, which were brutally few. Stay and certainly freeze to death before morning, or follow this mysterious animal into the storm on the slimmest chance of salvation. Okay, she decided, struggling to her feet and pulling the children up. We'll follow him, but stay right next to me, both of you. Hold my hands and don't let go. The first step outside the cave was like walking into a wall of ice. The wind stole Jenna's breath, and she momentarily doubted her decision. But the golden retriever moved confidently through the snow, occasionally pausing to ensure they were following. Every step was agony. The snow reached mid-thigh in places, and Jenna often had to lift Ben entirely, carrying him for stretches before her strength gave out. Emily trudged beside her, small face set in determination beyond her years. I can't, Jenna gasped after what felt like an eternity, her legs buckling beneath her. They'd been following the dog for almost 30 minutes, and her body was shutting down from the cold and exertion. I can't go any further. The dog returned instantly, pushing its warm body against hers, its eyes reflecting what seemed impossibly like understanding. It barked once, sharply, the first sound they'd heard from it. Look, Emily shouted above the wind, pointing ahead. Mommy, look! Through the curtain of swirling snow, lights glimmered, not the distant, cold points of stars, but the warm, golden rectangles of windows. A building, a large one, stood less than 100 yards away. Oh my God, Jenna breathed, finding renewed strength. Come on, kids, we're almost there. They pushed forward, the dog leading them unerringly toward the lights. As they drew closer, the building's silhouette emerged from the storm. A massive structure with the unmistakable grandeur of old wealth. A mansion, impossibly located in this remote wilderness. By the time they reached the front steps, Jenna was practically dragging both children. Her vision tunneled, darkness creeping in at the edges as her body approached its limits. The dog bounded ahead, disappearing around the side of the house. Wait! Jenna called weakly, fear of losing their guide competing with relief at finding shelter. She pulled herself and the children up the imposing stone steps to the massive front door. With the last of her strength, she raised her fist and knocked, the sound feeble against the solid wood. No answer came. She knocked again, harder, desperation lending force to the motion. Still nothing. Emily reached past her and tried the ornate door handle. To Jenna's astonishment, it turned easily. It's open, Emily said, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The heavy door swung inward, revealing a cavernous entryway bathed in warm light. Heat flowed out to embrace them, the contrast to the freezing storm so sudden it was almost painful. Hello? Jenna called, her voice echoing. Is anyone here? We're stranded travelers. We need help. Only silence answered, broken by the ticking of an unseen clock. They stepped inside, closing the door against the storm. The entrance hall was magnificent, marble floors, a sweeping staircase, antique furniture that spoke of both wealth and taste. But it was the warmth that made Jenna want to weep with gratitude. Actual, blessed warmth. Where is everyone? Ben asked, his voice small in the grand space. I don't know, Jenna admitted, helping the children remove their wet outer layers. But we're out of the cold. That's what matters right now. As sensation painfully returned to her extremities, Jenna took proper stock of their surroundings. The mansion was immaculately maintained, without a speck of dust visible on any surface, yet it felt empty. Not abandoned, but as though its occupants had simply stepped out moments before. Mommy, look at all the pictures, Emily said, wandering toward the nearest wall. Portraits lined the hallway, oil paintings in heavy gilt frames. Most depicted the same man at different ages, handsome, with an intelligent gaze and the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. In the largest portrait, he stood beside the very golden retriever that had led them to safety. Richard Kensington, Jenna read from the small plaque beneath the central portrait. Who are you, Mr. Kensington, and why is your home unlocked in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard? A sudden bark made them jump. The golden retriever had reappeared, sitting calmly at the base of the staircase, as if he'd been waiting for them to notice him. There you are, Ben exclaimed with delight. Thank you for saving us, doggy. The dog wagged his tail once, then turned and trotted deeper into the mansion. I think he wants us to follow him again, Emily said, already moving to do so. Wait, Jenna cautioned, maternal instincts warring with gratitude. We don't know whose house this is. We can't just wander around. But the dog lives here, Ben reasoned with a child's logic. See? He's in the picture with that man, so it's okay. Before Jenna could formulate a response, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. Heavy, measured steps descending the staircase. Jenna pulled her children behind her protectively, facing the stairs with a mixture of apprehension and relief. At least they weren't alone, though whether that would prove to be good or bad remained to be seen. A man appeared on the landing, tall and imposing with silver-streaked dark hair and a face mapped with deep lines of experience. He was perhaps in his early 60s, dressed in a heavy sweater and wool pants. His expression upon seeing them was one of absolute shock. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice a deep rumble. "And what are you doing in my house?" The man's question hung in the air, his face a mask of suspicion and surprise. Jenna instinctively tightened her grip on her children's shoulders. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Our car broke down in the storm. We were sheltering in a cave when your dog found us and led us here." The door was unlocked. The man's gaze shifted to the golden retriever, who had returned to sit calmly beside them. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My dog?" he repeated, a strange note in his voice. "I don't have a dog." An awkward silence followed as they all looked at the golden retriever, who seemed entirely at home, shaking off the last of the snow from his coat. "But he's in the portrait," Emily said, pointing to the painting of Richard Kensington. "With that man." The stranger's eyes narrowed as he descended the remaining stairs. Up close, Jenna could see the deep shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands suggesting either age or some great strain. "That's not me in the portrait," he said gruffly. "That's Richard Kensington. This was his house." "Was?" Jenna questioned. "He disappeared 5 years ago." The man studied them critically. "You really were caught in the storm?" Jenna nodded. "We nearly died out there. I'm Jenna Miller. These are my children, Emily and Ben." "Arthur Langley," he replied after a moment's hesitation. "I'm the caretaker." Something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely true, but Jenna was in no position to challenge him. "Please," she said, "we just need shelter until the storm passes. The children are exhausted and hungry." Arthur's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Emily and Ben, who were struggling to stay upright after their ordeal. "Fine," he conceded. "You can stay until the road's clear. There's plenty of room, God knows." He turned abruptly. "Follow me. You need dry clothes and food." He led them up the grand staircase, the golden retriever trotting alongside as if he'd been part of their group all along. "If the dog isn't yours," Ben asked innocently, "whose is he?" Arthur glanced at the animal with an unreadable expression. "As I said, he belonged to Kensington." "But that was 5 years ago," Jenna pointed out. "Who's been taking care of him?" "He comes and goes," Arthur replied vaguely. "Sometimes I don't see him for weeks. Then he just appears, like tonight." They reached a long hallway lined with doors. Arthur opened one, revealing a spacious bedroom with an adjoining bathroom. "You and the girl can take this room," he said. "The boy can have the room next door. I want to stay with Mommy," Ben protested immediately, clinging to Jenna's leg. Arthur sighed. "Fine. There's a trundle bed that can be pulled out. Bathroom has everything you need. I'll find you some dry clothes." He turned to leave, then paused. "Kitchen's downstairs. First door past the dining room. Help yourselves. I don't do meals." With that, he was gone, leaving them alone in the sumptuous bedroom. The dog, however, remained, settling himself comfortably on the plush rug near the fireplace. "He's not very friendly," Emily observed, sitting on the edge of the massive 4-poster bed. "He let us stay," Jenna reminded her, already moving to the bathroom to start a hot bath for the children. "That's friendly enough for me right now." Within an hour, both children were bathed, dressed in oversized t-shirts Arthur had left outside their door, and fast asleep in the comfortable beds. Jenna took her own turn in the bath, allowing herself to finally process the day's events as hot water thawed her frozen limbs. They had nearly died today. The realization hit her with delayed force, bringing tears to her eyes. If not for the mysterious dog still keeping watch in their bedroom, they would certainly have perished in that cave. After dressing in the clothes provided, a pair of sweatpants and a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of cedar, Jenna found herself too wired for sleep despite her exhaustion. The adrenaline crash left her both drained and oddly alert. The golden retriever raised his head as she moved toward the door. "I'm just going to find something to eat," she whispered. "Stay with the kids, okay?" As if understanding perfectly, the dog settled back down, eyes fixed protectively on the sleeping children. The mansion was eerily quiet as Jenna made her way downstairs, the only sounds her own footsteps and the occasional creak of old wood settling. The kitchen, when she found it, was a blend of old-world charm and modern convenience. Copper pots hanging above a huge island, alongside stainless steel appliances that looked barely used. She was making herself a simple sandwich when Arthur's voice came from the doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" Jenna started, nearly dropping the knife. "You move very quietly." "Old habit," he replied, entering the kitchen. Without asking, he removed a bottle from a cabinet and poured amber liquid into 2 glasses. He slid one toward her. "You look like you could use this." Jenna accepted the offered whiskey with a small nod of thanks. "It's been a day. Nearly dying will do that." Arthur said dryly, taking a seat at the island. Up close and in better light, Jenna could study him properly. His features were rugged rather than handsome, weathered by time and what appeared to be considerable hardship. There was an alertness to him, a coiled tension that never quite dissipated. "You don't seem surprised by strangers showing up during a blizzard," she observed. Arthur took a long sip of his drink. "Nothing surprises me anymore." "You said you're the caretaker, but you live here alone?" Jenna ventured. "I prefer solitude." "In a house this size?" His expression hardened slightly. "I didn't realize accommodation came with an interrogation." Jenna held up her hands in apology. "Sorry, I'm just trying to understand our situation here." For a moment, she thought he would shut down completely, but then something in his posture shifted. "Kensington was a friend," Arthur said, his tone softening marginally. "When he disappeared, he left provisions for the maintenance of the property. I needed somewhere isolated. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement." "What happened to him? Mr. Kensington?" Arthur's fingers tightened around his glass. "No one knows. One day he was here, the next he wasn't. The official investigation found nothing." A bitter note entered his voice. "They never do." Something in his words struck Jenna as odd. "Were you part of the investigation?" His eyes met hers, sharp and assessing. "What makes you ask that?" "Just a feeling," she replied carefully. "You don't speak like a caretaker. You speak like someone used to authority." A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "Perceptive. I was a detective. Boston homicide. Retired now. And you ended up here, caretaking a missing billionaire's mansion in the middle of nowhere?" "We all end up somewhere," he said simply. "Sometimes we choose the place. Sometimes it chooses us." The cryptic response raised more questions than it answered, but Jenna sensed it would be unwise to push further tonight. Instead, she changed the subject. "The dog," she said. "He saved our lives today. Led us right to your door." Arthur's expression grew distant. "He does that sometimes. Brings in strays." "Strays?" Jenna echoed, slightly offended. "No offense meant," Arthur amended. "But you're not the first people he's guided here during a storm. Has he ever led people to their deaths? Because that cave was a death trap." "No," Arthur said quietly. "He only saves, never endangers." He finished his drink in one swallow. "The storm should pass by tomorrow evening. The main road will be plowed by the following morning." "Thank you for letting us stay," Jenna said sincerely. Arthur nodded once, then rose to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "The dog," he said without turning. Kensington called him Scout. "Scout," Jenna repeated. "It suits him." "Yes," Arthur agreed softly. "It does." After he'd gone, Jenna finished her sandwich and whiskey, then made her way carefully back to the bedroom. True to his post, Scout was exactly where she'd left him, watching over her sleeping children. "Thank you," she whispered, kneeling to stroke his soft fur. "We owe you our lives." Scout leaned into her touch, his warm eyes seeming to convey understanding beyond what should be possible for an animal. Despite her earlier restlessness, Jenna found sleep came easily once she slipped under the luxurious covers. Her last conscious thought was that for a place so grand, the mansion felt strangely like a tomb, beautiful, preserved, but holding only remnants of a life long since departed. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through heavy curtains and the delighted giggles of her children. Jenna opened her eyes to find Emily and Ben already awake, playing with Scout on the bedroom floor. "He knows tricks, Mommy," Ben exclaimed. "Show her, Scout." At the command, Scout sat, offered his paw, then rolled over with an almost human sense of showmanship. "He's very smart," Jenna agreed, smiling at their joy. After yesterday's trauma, seeing them laugh was like medicine for her soul. They dressed in the assortment of clothes Arthur had left, clearly belongings of the missing Richard Kensington, tailored for a taller man but clean and well-made. When they ventured downstairs, they found the kitchen empty but a note on the counter. "Help yourselves. Gone to check generator. A.L. "I'm starving," Emily announced dramatically. "Me too," Ben agreed. "Can we have pancakes?" The simple domesticity of making breakfast in the grand kitchen felt surreal after their near-death experience, but Jenna embraced it, grateful for this moment of normalcy. Scout sat patiently nearby, accepting the occasional morsel with gentlemanly restraint. As they ate, Jenna noticed her children's attention repeatedly drawn to the windows, where the storm continued its assault, though with less ferocity than the previous night. "When can we go exploring?" Ben asked around a mouthful of syrupy pancake. "We're guests here, not tourists," Jenna reminded him. "We should stay in the areas Mr. Langley showed us." "But Scout wants to show us something," Emily insisted. "He keeps going to the door and coming back." Jenna glanced at the golden retriever, who was indeed standing by the kitchen door, looking back at them expectantly. "After breakfast," she compromised. "And we stay together, okay?" The moment the dishes were cleared, Scout led their small procession through the mansion's ground floor. Jenna couldn't help but marvel at the place. Every room was a testament to refined taste and old money, from the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves to the music room housing a grand piano and glass-cased antique instruments. Scout moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure they were following. He led them to a wood-paneled study dominated by a massive desk and more portraits of Richard Kensington at various ages. One photograph showed him receiving some kind of humanitarian award. Another depicted him breaking ground at a construction site. "He built things," Emily observed, studying the photos. "Looks like he built a lot of things," Jenna agreed, noting the plaques commemorating hospitals, schools, and housing developments. Scout padded to a specific bookshelf and sat, looking up expectantly. "What is it, boy?" Ben asked, approaching the shelf. Jenna joined him, examining the books. Nothing seemed unusual until she noticed a gap where a book had been removed. Scout pawed at the empty space, whining softly. "Something's missing," Jenna murmured. The sound of footsteps made them all turn. Arthur stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I see you've met the tour guide," he said dryly, nodding toward Scout. Jenna began apologetically. Arthur waved off her explanation. "It's fine. Scout has his routines." This was Richard's favorite room. "He seems like he was an interesting man," Jenna ventured, gesturing to the photographs. "He was," Arthur confirmed, a genuine fondness creeping into his usually guarded tone. "Brilliant mind. Self-made billionaire who never forgot where he came from. Used his fortune to help people who reminded him of himself as a young man." "How did you know him?" Emily asked boldly. Arthur hesitated, as if debating how much to share. "We met during a case years ago. He was a witness. We stayed in touch." "What's missing from the bookshelf?" Jenna asked, nodding toward the gap Scout had identified. Something flickered in Arthur's eyes. Recognition, then wariness. "Just an old journal. Nothing important." The lie was obvious, but Jenna chose not to call him on it. Instead, she changed the subject. "How's the storm looking?" "Tapering off, finally. Roads should be clear by tomorrow morning as I thought. I've called for a tow truck to retrieve your car." "That's very kind of you," Jenna said, genuinely touched by the consideration. Arthur looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "It's nothing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the East Wing. Lost power there overnight." After he'd gone, Emily turned to Jenna with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. "He's sad," she declared, "and he's hiding something." "Everyone has secrets, honey," Jenna reminded her, though she couldn't disagree with her daughter's assessment. "I think Scout wants us to find out what," Ben said, watching the dog still sitting patiently by the bookshelf with the missing volume. "Well, we're not going to snoop," Jenna said firmly. "Mr. Langley has been kind enough to give us shelter. We're not going to repay that by prying into his private affairs." Even as she said it, though, Jenna couldn't deny her own curiosity. There was clearly much more to Arthur Langley and this magnificent, isolated mansion than met the eye, and somehow, the mysterious Scout seemed determined to uncover it. The rest of the day passed quietly. Arthur remained mostly absent, appearing only briefly to check if they needed anything before disappearing again to some other part of the vast house. Scout stayed with them constantly, his warm presence a comfort that made the grand mansion feel less intimidating. That evening, as Jenna tucked her children into bed, Emily voiced the question that had been building all day. "Mommy, why does Scout want us to find that missing book so badly?" Jenna smoothed her daughter's hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe he just misses his owner." "I think it's more than that," Emily insisted with a child's conviction. "I think he's trying to tell us something important." "Well, whatever it is, it will have to wait until morning," Jenna said, kissing her forehead. "Time for sleep now." Once the children were asleep, Jenna found herself drawn back downstairs. The grand house was eerily silent at night, moonlight streaming through tall windows to cast elongated shadows across antique furnishings. She hadn't intended to return to the study, but her feet carried her there nonetheless. She told herself she was just stretching her legs, fighting off the restlessness that came with being stranded in a strange place. The study door was ajar, a sliver of warm light indicating it wasn't empty. Jenna hesitated, not wanting to intrude if Arthur was inside. She was about to turn away when she heard his voice, low, rough, and filled with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. "I know what you're doing," he was saying, "but it won't bring them back. Nothing will." Curiosity overrode propriety, and Jenna peered through the narrow opening. Arthur sat at the desk, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, addressing Scout who sat attentively before him. "5 years, and you're still trying to fix what can't be fixed," Arthur continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Why can't you understand? It's too late." Scout whined softly, placing his paw on Arthur's knee. "I know, boy. I miss them too." The raw grief in Arthur's voice made Jenna's chest tight. She must have made some small sound, for suddenly Arthur's head snapped up, his eyes finding hers through the doorway. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, embarrassed at being caught eavesdropping. "I was just walking and saw the light." Arthur's expression closed off, the vulnerability she'd witnessed vanishing behind his customary reserve. "It's late. You should be resting." "Who were you talking about?" Jenna asked gently, entering the room despite his obvious desire for solitude. When you said them, for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then something in him seemed to deflate. My family, he said quietly. My wife Laura, our daughter Claire, they died 5 years ago. I'm so sorry, Jenna said, meaning it. Was it an accident? Arthur's laugh held no humor. That would have been easier to accept. No, it wasn't an accident. They were murdered. The blunt statement hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. The case that brought me into Richard's orbit, Arthur continued after a moment, his voice distant, was investigating a crime syndicate laundering money through construction projects. Richard was developing properties in the same area, noticed irregularities, and came forward as a witness. He took a slow sip of his whiskey before continuing. His testimony was crucial, put away several high-level operators. But one got away, the ringleader, a man named Victor Mercer. Arthur's knuckles whitened around his glass. Mercer swore vengeance on everyone involved in the case. 3 months later, I came home to find, he broke off, unable to complete the sentence. That's when Richard disappeared, Jenna said softly, making the connection. Arthur nodded once. The official theory was that Mercer got to him too, but nobody was ever found. And you came here. Why? After it happened, I was, not well, obsessed with finding Mercer. Nearly destroyed myself in the process. Richard had left instructions that I was to be given access to this property if anything happened to him. His lawyers contacted me. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Richard always did have an uncanny ability to anticipate others' needs. So you've been living here ever since, Jenna said, putting the pieces together. Hiding from the world. Not hiding, Arthur corrected sharply. Waiting. For what? His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them was startling. For answers. For justice. For whatever comes first. Scout moved to stand between them, looking from one to the other, as if following their conversation. The dog's intelligent gaze made Jenna wonder, not for the first time, if he understood far more than an animal should. And Scout? She asked. He was Richard's dog, but he stays with you? As I said, he comes and goes, sometimes disappears for weeks, but he always returns. Arthur's expression softened as he looked at the golden retriever. Richard called him his conscience, said Scout could sense goodness in people, always knew who needed help. He certainly knew we needed help last night, Jenna agreed. Yes, Arthur said, studying her with renewed interest. He's never brought anyone quite like you before. What do you mean? The others were travelers, hikers, people passing through, not a mother with young children starting a new life. Arthur's perception was unnervingly accurate. It makes me wonder what Scout thinks you need to be here for. The question lingered between them, unanswered but heavy with implication. Outside, the storm continued to rage, though with diminishing fury, a perfect metaphor, Jenna thought, for the emotional tempest contained within the mansion's walls. Dawn brought a transformed landscape. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white that sparkled under clear skies. Jenna stood at the bedroom window, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered mountains, a cautious hope building within her. If the roads were cleared as Arthur predicted, they could resume their journey by afternoon. Yet as she gazed out at the breathtaking vista, she felt an unexpected reluctance. There was something unfinished here, a mystery surrounding Arthur, Richard Kensington, and the remarkably intuitive Scout that tugged at her curiosity. Mommy, can we go outside and play in the snow? Ben asked, joining her at the window. Please? Emily added. It looks so perfect. After breakfast, Jenna agreed. But stay where I can see you from the house. The children cheered, their excitement infectious. Even Scout, curled at the foot of Ben's bed, perked up his ears and wagged his tail. When they made their way downstairs, they found Arthur in the kitchen, already dressed in heavy outdoor clothing. Going somewhere? Jenna asked, noting the backpack by his feet. Need to check the road conditions, he replied, and clear the driveway enough for the tow truck to get through. There's coffee made. Thank you. The kids want to play outside after breakfast. Is that okay? Arthur nodded. The storm's passed. Should be safe enough now. He hesitated, then added, try to keep them on the west side of the house. Better visibility from the kitchen windows. We will, Jenna promised, touched by his concern despite his gruff demeanor. As Arthur prepared to leave, Scout approached him, nosing at his backpack. A silent communication seemed to pass between them before Arthur patted the dog's head. Not this time, boy. Stay with them. Scout obediently retreated to sit beside Ben, who immediately threw an arm around the dog's neck in a half-hug. He really listens to you, Jenna observed. He listens to everyone, Arthur corrected. He just chooses when to obey. After a simple breakfast, Jenna bundled the children in layers of their own clothes topped with some smaller items she'd found in a hallway closet, likely belonging to visitors from years past. They tumbled out into the snow with unbridled joy, Scout bounding alongside them. Jenna watched from the kitchen window as Emily and Ben built a lopsided snowman, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Scout participated enthusiastically, rolling in the snow and occasionally bringing them sticks for the snowman's arms. It was during one such retrieval that something unusual happened. Instead of returning with a simple stick, Scout emerged from around the corner of the house with what appeared to be a weathered leather notebook in his mouth. Jenna's interest piqued immediately. She watched as Scout delivered his find to Emily, who examined it with visible excitement before showing it to Ben. Both children then looked toward the house, clearly searching for her. Within moments, they were bursting through the back door, faces flushed with cold and discovery. "Mommy, look what Scout found." Emily thrust the item forward, a leather-bound journal, its pages swollen slightly from moisture but largely intact. "Where did he find this?" Jenna asked, accepting the journal cautiously. "Behind some bushes near the east side of the house," Ben explained. "It was kind of buried in the snow, but Scout dug it up." "Is it the missing book from the shelf?" Emily asked eagerly. Jenna examined the journal, noting with growing certainty that it was indeed the volume Scout had been so interested in the day before. The leather binding matched the other books on Richard Kensington's shelf, and the faded gold monogram on the cover, RK, confirmed its ownership. "I think it might be," she confirmed, feeling a mixture of curiosity and unease. "But if this was hidden outside, it means someone deliberately took it from the library and concealed it." "Maybe Mr. Langley?" Ben suggested. "Or maybe Richard Kensington himself," Emily countered, "before he disappeared." "Either way," Jenna said firmly, "this belongs to the house. We should put it back on the shelf where Scout indicated it was missing." "Aren't you going to read it first?" Emily asked, voicing the temptation Jenna herself was feeling. "That would be an invasion of privacy," Jenna said, though her conviction wavered at Scout's intent gaze. The dog seemed to be urging her to open the journal, pushing it closer with his nose. "I think Scout wants you to read it," Ben observed. "Maybe there's something important inside." Jenna's fingers hovered over the cover. "Just a quick look," she finally conceded, "to make sure there's nothing urgent. Then we're putting it back exactly where it belongs." The journal opened stiffly, its pages crackling with cold and age. Richard Kensington's handwriting was neat and precise, filling the pages with observations, thoughts, and occasional sketches. Jenna flipped carefully through the early entries, which detailed business meetings and personal reflections from approximately 6 years ago. It wasn't until she reached entries from 5 years ago, around the time of Arthur's family's murder and Richard's Bodney disappearance, that her attention truly caught. "April 15th, she read aloud. "Arthur's world has shattered. Laura and Claire are gone, taken by Mercer's men in the most cowardly act of vengeance. The police have no leads. Arthur is consumed by grief and rage. A dangerous combination I know too well. I fear what he might do, how far he might go in pursuit of justice that the law cannot provide." Emily and Ben listened with wide eyes, too young to fully comprehend the tragedy but old enough to recognize its gravity. Jenna continued reading, skimming through several entries describing Richard's growing concern for Arthur's mental state and his own increasing paranoia about Mercer's organization. Then she found an entry that made her breath catch. "May 30th. My sources confirm Mercer has contracted my death. Arthur would be next. I've finalized my contingency plan, the only way to save us both and eventually bring Mercer to justice. Few will understand my choice, but it's the only path forward. Arthur will hate me for it initially. I only pray that someday he'll forgive me, when he understands the full scope of what I've set in motion." "What does that mean?" Emily asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm not sure," Jenna admitted, turning the page. The next entry was the final one in the journal. "June 20. All arrangements are complete. My disappearance is scheduled for tomorrow. The evidence against Mercer is secured in the place only Scout can find, my faithful conscience and guardian. When the time is right, he'll know who to lead there. The hardest part is leaving Arthur to believe another friend has been taken from him, but it's necessary for his safety. Better he mourn me than join Laura and Claire. I've instructed my lawyers to offer him sanctuary here, where the safeguards I've installed will protect him until my work is finished. If I succeed, justice will come for Laura and Claire. If I fail, at least Arthur will be safe from Mercer's reach." Jenna closed the journal slowly, her mind racing with implications. "Richard Kensington didn't die," she murmured. "He disappeared intentionally, to protect Arthur and to gather evidence against this man Mercer. So where is he now?" Ben asked innocently. "I don't know, honey," Jenna replied, glancing at Scout. The dog was watching her with that same unnerving intelligence, his purpose suddenly clearer. "But I think Scout has been trying to lead us to these answers all along. We should tell Mr. Langley," Emily declared. "Wait," Jenna cautioned. "We need to think this through. This journal is 5 years old. If Richard Kensington is alive, why hasn't he contacted Arthur? Why hasn't Mercer been brought to justice? Maybe something went wrong with his plan," Emily suggested, showing insight beyond her years. "Maybe," Jenna agreed. Or maybe. Her speculation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and closing. Arthur had returned. Scout's ears perked up, but instead of running to greet him as expected, the dog pushed the journal toward Jenna with his nose, then moved to sit in front of the door as if standing guard. "He doesn't want Mr. Langley to know we found it," Ben whispered, catching on quickly. "Not yet," Jenna agreed, quickly slipping the journal into the inner pocket of her borrowed sweater. "Let's not mention this until we understand more, okay? This is grown-up business." Both children nodded solemnly, recognizing the seriousness of the situation despite their youth. Arthur appeared in the kitchen doorway, stamping snow from his boots. "Road to the main highway is clear," he announced. "Tow truck will be here by noon to get your car. Should be able to have it running, or at least towed to a garage by evening." "That's good news," Jenna replied, hoping her voice sounded normal. "Thank you for arranging it." Arthur's gaze swept over them, lingering briefly on Scout's protective posture before returning to Jenna's face. "You seem unsettled. Everything all right?" "Just processing how quickly things are moving," Jenna improvised. "Yesterday we were nearly freezing to death, and now we're planning to leave. It's a lot to take in." Arthur nodded, seeming to accept her explanation. "Life changes quickly, something you learn in my line of work." "Your former line of work," Jenna corrected gently. A shadow crossed Arthur's face. "Some jobs you never really leave behind." He glanced at his watch. "I need to make some calls. Make yourselves at home until the truck arrives." After he left, Emily tugged at Jenna's sleeve. "What are we going to do about the journal and Mr. Kensington's secret?" Jenna knelt to her children's level. "I'm not sure yet, but I think we were meant to find this. Scout made sure of it. Let me read more of the journal while you two play. Maybe there are more clues about what Richard was planning." While the children returned to their snowman under the watchful eye of Scout, Jenna retreated to a window seat in the library where she could both supervise their play and examine the journal more thoroughly. The earlier entries painted a picture of Richard Kensington as a brilliant, compassionate man deeply troubled by the corruption he had uncovered and the subsequent threat to those he cared about. His friendship with Arthur was clearly profound. He wrote of their conversations, Arthur's devotion to his family, and later, his devastating grief. Most intriguing were Richard's references to the evidence and the place only Scout can find. Whatever proof he had gathered against Mercer, he had hidden it somewhere on the property, believing Scout would lead the right person to it when the time came. "Is that why you brought us here?" Jenna murmured, looking out at the golden retriever playing with her children. "Is that what you're trying to accomplish?" The sound of approaching footsteps made her quickly tuck the journal away again. Arthur appeared in the library doorway, his expression tense. "Is something wrong?" Jenna asked, noting his rigid posture. "The tow truck can't make it," he said. "Avalanche further down the mountain has closed the main access road. They're saying at least 2 days before it's cleared." "Oh," Jenna said, surprised by her own relief at the news. "Well, I hope we're not imposing too much by staying longer." Arthur waved away her concern. "The house has plenty of space. And the children." He paused, his eyes drifting to the window where Emily and Ben were laughing. It's been a long time since there was young laughter here. The uncharacteristic sentiment revealed a glimpse of the man beneath the hardened exterior. Jenna seized the opportunity to build a connection. "Arthur," she began carefully, "last night you mentioned your family. I want you to know I understand something of what you're going through. My marriage ended because my husband became someone else, not the man I thought I'd married. It's a different kind of loss, but I know how it feels when life suddenly veers off the path you expected." Arthur's expression softened marginally. "How long?" "The divorce was finalized last month, but the marriage died years ago." "Where were you headed? Before the storm?" "Mayfield," Jenna replied. "I have a job lined up at the elementary school there, teaching 2nd grade. "A teacher," Arthur nodded, as if this explained something about her. "You're good with children." "I try to be," Jenna smiled, "though my own keep me on my toes." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Scout began barking excitedly outside. They both turned to see the dog running in circles around something in the snow. "What's he found now?" Arthur muttered, more to himself than to Jenna. They watched as Emily brushed snow away from whatever Scout had discovered, revealing what appeared to be a metal handle protruding from the ground. "Is that a door?" Jenna asked, leaning closer to the window. Arthur's posture changed instantly, tension radiating from every line of his body. "Stay here," he ordered, already striding toward the hallway. "Wait, my children are out there," Jenna protested, hurrying after him. By the time they reached the back door, Emily and Ben had managed to clear most of the snow from what was indeed a small metal door set into the ground, a cellar entrance or storm shelter of some kind. "Step away from that," Arthur called sharply as he trudged through the snow toward them. Emily looked up, startled by his tone. "But Scout wants us to open it. He keeps pawing at the handle." Sure enough, the golden retriever was intently focused on the metal door, occasionally glancing back at the approaching adults as if urging them to hurry. "It's just an old storage cellar," Arthur said, his casual tone belied by the tension in his shoulders. Nothing of interest down there. Then why is Scout so excited about it? Ben asked innocently. Arthur reached them, placing himself between the children and the cellar door. Scout gets excited about squirrels too. Doesn't mean we should dig up every hole in the yard. Jenna caught up, slightly breathless from the cold air. Kids, why don't you go inside and warm up? You've been out for quite a while. But Mom, Emily began to protest. Now please, Jenna said firmly, using her teacher voice that brooked no argument. With reluctant glances at the mysterious door, both children trudged toward the house, Scout surprisingly making no move to follow them. Instead, he remained firmly planted beside the cellar entrance, eyes fixed on Arthur with what Jenna could only describe as challenge. Once the children were safely inside, Jenna turned to Arthur. What's really down there? Like I said, storage, Arthur maintained, though his eyes never left Scout. Old equipment, gardening tools, nothing worth getting excited about. Then why are you lying about it? Jenna asked directly. Arthur's head snapped toward her, surprise evident in his expression. Excuse me? Jenna took a deep breath, deciding it was time to lay her cards on the table. I found Richard's journal, the one that was missing from the shelf. Scout dug it up from the snow while you were gone this morning. Arthur's face drained of color. What does that have to do with everything, I think? Jenna interrupted gently. Richard wrote about evidence he gathered against Mercer, evidence he hid somewhere on the property that only Scout can find. And now Scout is very interested in that cellar door. Arthur stood motionless, the internal struggle visible on his weathered face. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible above the mountain wind. You don't understand what you're getting involved in. Then help me understand, Jenna urged. Richard was your friend. He disappeared to protect you, to gather evidence that would bring justice for your family. Whatever is down there might be exactly what you've been waiting for these past 5 years. Or it might be nothing, Arthur countered, though doubt had crept into his voice. Richard's been gone for 5 years. If he had evidence against Mercer, why hasn't he used it? Why leave me here, thinking he was dead all this time? I don't know, Jenna admitted, but I think we need to find out. Scout brought us here for a reason, Arthur. I believe that reason is connected to whatever's behind that door. Arthur stared at the cellar entrance, conflict evident in every line of his body. Then Scout whined softly, pressing his head against Arthur's hand in a gesture so gentle and encouraging that Jenna felt tears spring to her eyes. Okay, Arthur finally conceded, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Let's see what Richard's conscience wants us to find. He knelt in the snow and grasped the metal handle. The door resisted at first, frozen shut by years of neglect, but with a forceful pull it broke free, revealing a narrow set of concrete steps descending into darkness. Wait here, Arthur instructed, reaching into his pocket for a small flashlight. Not a chance, Jenna replied, surprising herself with her own determination. We do this together. Something like respect flickered in Arthur's eyes before he nodded once, leading the way down the worn steps with Scout trotting confidently ahead. The cellar was larger than Jenna had expected, a series of interconnected rooms carved into the bedrock beneath the mansion. The first room did indeed contain gardening equipment and storage, as Arthur had claimed, but Scout paid it no attention, moving purposefully toward a metal door at the far end. This second door was different, newer, with an electronic keypad glowing faintly in the dim light. I've never seen this before, Arthur admitted, examining the lock. Never knew it was here. Scout sat before the keypad, looking expectantly at Arthur. I don't know the code, Arthur told the dog, as if expecting him to understand. Scout barked once, then pawed at Arthur's pocket, the one where he kept his wallet. What? Arthur asked, confused, but he removed his wallet nonetheless. Try your birthday, Jenna suggested. Arthur shook his head. Richard wouldn't use something so obvious, but Scout continued to nose at the wallet until Arthur opened it. From within, he extracted a faded photograph, a candid shot of Arthur with a beautiful woman and a young girl, all laughing at something off camera. Laura and Claire, Jenna said softly, recognizing the family from Arthur's description. Arthur stared at the photo, his expression raw with grief and love. Richard took this picture at a barbecue at his place, about 6 months before. He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Scout whined again, pawing at the photograph. Arthur turned it over, revealing a series of numbers written on the back in faded ink. It's a date, Arthur realized, the date of this photo. With trembling fingers, he entered the numbers into the keypad. The lock clicked open immediately. He knew you'd keep this photo with you, Jenna said quietly, even after all these years. Arthur didn't reply, but the depth of emotion on his face spoke volumes. Pushing the door open, he stepped into what appeared to be a small, meticulously organized office. A desk with a computer, filing cabinets, and a wall covered in photographs, documents, and maps connected by colored strings, a detective's investigation board. Richard, Arthur breathed, taking in the scene with growing astonishment. This was his war room. Scout moved to the desk, pawing at a drawer insistently. When Arthur opened it, he found a sealed envelope with his name written on it in Richard's distinctive handwriting. While Arthur read the letter with shaking hands, Jenna examined the wall of evidence. It detailed an elaborate criminal network headed by Victor Mercer, with connections to corrupt officials, money laundering operations, and, most disturbingly, several murders, including those of Laura and Claire Langley. He's been building a case, Jenna realized aloud. All these years in secret. Yes, Arthur confirmed, his voice unsteady as he looked up from the letter. Richard didn't just disappear. He died in a way, became someone else, a ghost who could infiltrate Mercer's organization from within. What does the letter say? Jenna asked gently. Arthur handed it to her wordlessly. The handwriting was hurried but clear. Arthur, if you're reading this, then Scout has found someone he trusts to help you. I'm sorry for the pain my disappearance caused, but it was the only way to keep you safe while I gathered what we needed. The evidence is all here, everything to put Mercer away for life. But I couldn't send it to the authorities while you were still vulnerable. Mercer has too many eyes in law enforcement. By now, I've likely been dead for several years. My new identity has allowed me to document Mercer's operation from the inside. The final piece came into place last month. I'll be making contact soon, within days of when Scout leads you to this room. Be ready, old friend. Justice for Laura and Claire is finally within reach. Trust Scout. He knows who can be trusted better than either of us ever could. Richard. Jenna looked up from the letter, meeting Arthur's stunned gaze. He's coming back, she said softly. After all this time, he's coming back to help you finish this. Arthur seemed unable to process the revelation. Decades of detective suspicion warring with desperate hope. The letter isn't dated. How long has this been here? What does he mean by soon? As if in answer, Scout suddenly perked up his ears and bounded back toward the stairs, barking excitedly. Someone's here, Arthur said sharply, instantly alert. He moved to a cabinet, extracting a handgun that Jenna hadn't realized he possessed. Stay behind me. They followed Scout up the cellar stairs, emerging into the bright winter sunlight that momentarily blinded them. When Jenna's vision cleared, she gasped at the scene before them. A black SUV had pulled up in the driveway. Standing beside it was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, silver-haired, bearded, and notably different from the portraits inside, yet unmistakably the same person. Richard Kensington had returned, and beside him, watching the reunion with delighted expressions, stood Emily and Ben, apparently the first to greet the mansion's long-absent owner. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Arthur stood motionless, the gun now lowered at his side, staring at the man he'd believed dead for 5 years. Richard Kensington returned the gaze steadily, his expression a complex mixture of apology, affection, and apprehension. Scout broke the spell, racing across the snow to greet Richard with unrestrained joy, nearly knocking him over in his enthusiasm. Richard knelt to embrace the dog, whispering words too soft for Jenna to hear as he buried his face in Scout's golden fur. "You're alive," Arthur finally said, his voice raw and disbelieving. Richard straightened, keeping one hand on Scout's head. "I am," he confirmed simply, though there were times I wasn't certain I'd remain that way. Emily tugged at Richard's sleeve with the uninhibited directness of childhood. "Are you the man from all the pictures in the house?" A gentle smile transformed Richard's weathered features. "I was, once, though I look a bit different now. Your dog saved us in the snowstorm," Ben informed him proudly. "Did he now?" Richard replied, unsurprised. Scout has always had excellent judgment about who needs help. His gaze shifted to Jenna, appraising but kind. "And you must be the children's mother. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances of our meeting." "Jenna Miller," she confirmed, struck by the man's commanding yet gentle presence. "And no apology necessary. Your dog saved our lives." Richard nodded, then turned back to Arthur, who had not moved from his position. "Arthur," he began, his tone softening, "I know you have questions, grievances. You deserve answers to both." Arthur's jaw tightened. 5 years, Rich. 5 years I thought you were dead." "It was the only way," Richard replied, regret evident in his voice. "Mercer had informants everywhere. If anyone, even you, had known I was alive, it would have compromised everything. You let me believe I'd lost another person I cared about," Arthur said, anger finally breaking through his shock. "After Laura and Claire." Richard flinched visibly at the names. "I know, it's unforgivable, but I hope when you see what I've accomplished, you'll understand why it was necessary." An awkward silence fell, broken only by Scout's happy panting as he moved between the two men as if trying to physically bridge the gap between them. Jenna recognized the children's growing discomfort at the tension. "Kids, why don't we go inside and make some hot chocolate? I'm sure Mr. Kensington and Mr. Probble Langley have a lot to discuss." Emily and Ben, sensing the gravity of the adult situation, agreed without protest. As they turned toward the house, Richard called after them. "If you don't mind, I'd like Scout to stay with me. It's been a long time since I've seen him properly." Jenna nodded her understanding, guiding her children back to the mansion while casting one last glance at the two men standing in the snow, former friends reunited by circumstances neither could have predicted. Inside, as she heated milk on the stove, Emily peppered her with questions. "Is that really the missing billionaire? Why does he look so different in person? Why did he pretend to be dead?" "Yes, that's Mr. Kensington," Jenna confirmed, measuring cocoa powder. "And sometimes adults have to do difficult things to protect the people they care about, like how we had to leave our old house and Daddy to be safe," Ben asked innocently. Jenna's heart clenched at the parallel her son had drawn. "Something like that, yes. Mr. Kensington was trying to catch a very bad man who hurt Mr. Langley's family. He had to pretend to be someone else to do that. Like a spy?" Emily's eyes widened with excitement. "A bit like that," Jenna agreed, unwilling to reveal the more disturbing aspects of the situation to her children. As they sipped their hot chocolate, Jenna positioned herself near the kitchen window, which offered a partial view of the driveway. Arthur and Richard were still outside, apparently deep in tense conversation. Scout sat between them, his attention swiveling from one to the other as they spoke. Eventually, both men moved toward the house, their body language suggesting that while much remained unresolved, a tentative truce had been established. The kitchen door opened, admitting a blast of cold air along with Arthur, Richard, and Scout. The dog immediately went to Ben, resting his head on the boy's lap as if seeking comfort after the emotional encounter outside. "I believe we all have some catching up to do," Richard announced, removing his heavy coat to reveal a lean frame and simple, practical clothing that bore little resemblance to the elegant attire he wore in his portraits. "But first, I owe everyone an explanation." Emily straightened importantly. "We found your journal," she informed him, "and the secret room under the house." Richard's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Did you now?" Scout has been busy indeed. He cast an affectionate glance at the dog. Always did have his own agenda. "The journal explains some of it," Arthur said, his tone still guarded. "But not everything." "No," Richard agreed, accepting the coffee Jenna offered with a grateful nod. "The full story is complicated." "We have time," Jenna said, glancing outside where the snow still blanketed the landscape, isolating them from the world beyond. "The avalanche has us stranded for at least another day." Richard settled into a chair at the kitchen table, his posture revealing a bone-deep exhaustion that he had been concealing. "Then I'll start at the beginning, though perhaps the children." Jenna understood his concern. "Emily, Ben, why don't you go play in the library for a while? The grown-ups need to talk about some important things." Surprisingly, both children agreed without protest, sensing the significance of the moment. Scout accompanied them, though not before casting a meaningful look at Richard that once again struck Jenna as uncannily human in its understanding. Once they were alone, Richard began his tale. He spoke for nearly an hour, detailing how, after the murders of Laura and Claire, he had recognized that conventional justice would never reach Victor Mercer. The man was too well connected, too protected by corrupt officials and loyal underlings. "The turning point came when my security team intercepted a threat against Arthur," Richard explained. "Mercer wasn't satisfied with killing Laura and Claire. He wanted Arthur eliminated too, as a message to anyone else who might testify against his organization." "You never told me that," Arthur said quietly. "Would it have made a difference?" Richard asked. "You were already consumed with finding him. Knowing he was actively hunting you would only have made you more reckless." He sighed heavily. "I couldn't lose you too, Arthur, not after everything that had happened. So I made a choice." The choice, as Richard described it, had been both desperate and meticulously planned. With the help of a few trusted confidants, he had staged his own disappearance, allowing the world to believe that Victor Mercer had claimed another victim. Then, using resources few billionaires would admit to possessing, Richard had crafted a new identity, that of a middle management facilitator with connections to organized crime. It took almost 2 years to establish the identity thoroughly enough to approach Mercer's organization, Richard continued. Another year to gain enough trust to access meaningful information. The last 2 years have been spent documenting everything, every transaction, every order, every connection to corrupt officials, building an airtight case that not even Mercer's influence could dismantle. "And now?" Jenna asked. Richard's expression hardened. "Now we have everything we need. Financial records, witness testimonies, recorded conversations. Enough to put Mercer away for several lifetimes and to bring down everyone who protected him." "Why now?" Arthur pressed. "Why come back today, specifically?" "Because as of yesterday, the evidence is secure with federal authorities outside Mercer's reach," Richard revealed. "I've spent the past 24 hours briefing a special task force. Arrests are being made as we speak. Mercer's lieutenants, his corrupt contacts in local law enforcement, his political protectors. Mercer himself will be in custody within hours. And you're sure it will stick this time? Arthur's voice held years of bitter disappointment. I am, Richard affirmed. The evidence is overwhelming, and I've taken precautions to ensure it reaches the public if the legal process is compromised. Mercer's reign ends today, Arthur. I promised you justice for Laura and Claire. It's finally here. Arthur sat in stunned silence, the reality of what Richard had accomplished slowly sinking in. 5 years of self-imposed exile. 5 years of painstaking undercover work. 5 years of allowing his closest friend to believe he was dead, all to fulfill a promise of justice. Why did Scout bring us here? Jenna asked softly, breaking the silence. Was it just coincidence that we were stranded during the storm? Richard's expression softened as he glanced toward the doorway where Scout had disappeared with the children. Scout has always had a sense about these things. My father used to say he had the soul of a guardian angel in a dog's body. A small smile touched his lips. Over the years, he's brought various people to the mansion. Travelers in need of shelter, a hiker with a broken ankle, but never a family, never children. He was trying to help Arthur, Jenna realized. Bringing us here, leading us to the journal, to the hidden room. He wanted Arthur to have the truth before you arrived. Yes, Richard agreed. And perhaps more than that. Scout seems to have recognized something in you and your children that Arthur needed. His gaze shifted to Arthur. How long has it been since you heard children's laughter in this house? Arthur didn't answer, but the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. Scout brought your family here for a reason, Ms. Miller, Richard continued, and I've learned never to question his judgment. We're hardly a proper family, Jenna said softly, just a divorced mother starting over with 2 kids. Sometimes the families we choose are more important than the ones we're born into, Richard replied, his gaze returning to Arthur. Isn't that right, old friend? A complex emotion crossed Arthur's face, something between grief and grudging forgiveness. You might be right about that, he conceded, the first hint of thawing in his demeanor since Richard's return. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the library, punctuated by Scout's playful bark. The 3 adults fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as the implications of the day's revelations settled around them. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. You should have trusted me, Rich. I could have helped. You would have insisted on coming with me, Richard countered gently. And then who would have been here for Scout? For the house? For the legacy we built? I spent 5 years thinking I'd failed another person I cared about, Arthur said, the admission clearly difficult for him. That Mercer had taken you just like he took Laura and Claire. I know, Richard acknowledged, genuine remorse in his eyes, and I will spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends for that pain. But I couldn't see another way, Arthur. If Mercer had discovered I was alive, if he had connected you to my continued existence in any way. I understand the logic, Arthur interrupted. It's the deception that's hard to forgive. I don't expect forgiveness, Richard replied simply. Only understanding, and perhaps in time, a chance to rebuild what was broken. The raw honesty in his voice seemed to reach Arthur in a way that explanations and justifications had not. A subtle shift occurred in his posture, a fractional relaxation of the rigid anger he'd maintained since Richard's appearance. Well, Arthur said eventually, I suppose 5 years of taking down a criminal empire does count for something. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, a first step toward healing a friendship damaged by necessary betrayal. A comfortable silence fell, broken when Jenna excused herself to check on the children. She found Emily, Ben, and Scout in the library, the children teaching the dog an elaborate game involving retrieving specific books from the lower shelves. Having fun? She asked, smiling at their obvious delight. Scout's super smart, Mom, Ben informed her earnestly. He knows the difference between colors and can find any book we describe. Is everything okay with the grown-ups? Emily asked, her perceptiveness once again surprising Jenna. Yes, sweetheart. Mr. Kensington and Mr. Langley are old friends who haven't seen each other in a long time. They're just catching up. Emily nodded sagely. They seemed upset with each other, but not anymore? They're working through some complicated feelings, Jenna explained, sitting on the plush carpet beside her children. Sometimes adults have disagreements that take time to resolve. Like you and Dad? Ben asked innocently. Jenna hesitated, then nodded. Something like that, yes, though the situation is very different. Scout approached, resting his head in Jenna's lap with a sigh of contentment. She stroked his soft fur, marveling at the dog's uncanny ability to sense emotional needs. Do we still have to leave tomorrow? Emily asked suddenly. The question caught Jenna off guard. Well, yes. Once the roads are cleared, we have our new home waiting in Mayfield, remember? And I start my new job next week. Both children's faces fell, though they nodded in understanding. Scout whined softly, as if sharing their disappointment. We'll miss Scout, Ben said sadly, and Mr. Langley, even though he doesn't smile much. And the mansion, Emily added. It feels safe here. The observation struck Jenna forcefully. safe, after months of anxiety, of looking over her shoulder, of fearing her ex-husband might change his mind about the custody arrangement. Here, in this isolated mansion with a grieving former detective and a presumed dead billionaire, her children felt safe, and if she was honest with herself, so did she. The realization accompanied her back to the kitchen, where she found Richard and Arthur poring over documents spread across the table, evidence from the hidden room now brought into the light. They looked up at her entrance, Richard with warmth and Arthur with what might have been the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Everything all right?" Arthur asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Yes," Jenna said slowly. "Just thinking about next steps. The road should be clear tomorrow." Richard nodded. "I've arranged for your car to be retrieved and repaired. It should be ready by morning." "Thank you," Jenna said sincerely, "for everything, though I'm not sure how we'll ever repay such kindness." "Your presence here has been payment enough," Richard replied cryptically, exchanging a meaningful glance with Arthur. The rest of the day passed in a strange harmony, as if the mansion itself was exhaling after years of held breath. Richard and Arthur continued their discussions, occasionally including Jenna when the conversation turned from the technical details of evidence to broader philosophical questions of justice and redemption. By evening, the atmosphere had transformed. Richard prepared dinner, a skill he'd apparently honed during his years undercover, while Arthur entertained the children with surprisingly gentle patience, teaching them a card game he claimed to have invented for his own daughter years ago. Scout moved between all of them, his contentment obvious in his relaxed posture and occasional sighs of satisfaction. Several times, Jenna caught Richard watching the dog with an expression of profound gratitude. "He never gave up," Richard explained when he noticed Jenna's observation. "All these years, Scout has been keeping watch, over Arthur, over the house, over the truth I left behind. I think in his way, he understood what I was trying to accomplish better than any human could." After dinner, as the children prepared for bed, Richard drew Jenna aside. "I owe you thanks," he said quietly. "Your presence here has done more for Arthur in 3 days than I could have accomplished in months." "I haven't done anything special," Jenna protested. "You've brought life back into this house," Richard countered. "Laughter, innocence, things Arthur has been without for far too long." Jenna didn't know how to respond to such an assessment. Instead, she asked the question that had been nagging at her since their earlier conversation. "What happens now? With you? With this place?" Richard considered the question thoughtfully. "I can never fully reclaim my old life. Richard Kensington, as the world knew him, is gone. Too many people believe I'm dead, and resurrecting that identity would raise too many questions I'm not prepared to answer." "So you'll disappear again?" Jenna asked, dismayed at the thought. "Not entirely," Richard assured her. "I'll establish a new identity, more limited in scope but sufficient for my needs. The fortune I accumulated is mostly in trusts and foundations now, doing good work around the world." A small smile touched his lips. "I've learned to live more simply these past years. It suits me." "And Arthur? Will you leave him again?" Richard's expression grew serious. "That depends largely on Arthur, and perhaps on you." "Me?" Jenna repeated, startled. "I've been watching you with him," Richard said carefully. "There's a connection forming there, whether you've acknowledged it or not. Arthur needs someone who understands loss but hasn't been consumed by it, someone who still sees the world with hope." Jenna felt her cheeks warm. "You're reading too much into a very brief acquaintance, Mr. Kensington. We've barely known each other 3 days. Sometimes that's all it takes," Richard replied, unperturbed, "especially when Scout has a paw in arranging the meeting." Before Jenna could formulate a response, Emily and Ben appeared in their borrowed pajamas, ready for their bedtime story. Scout followed close behind, his golden form now a familiar and comforting presence to the children. As Jenna led them upstairs, she found herself contemplating Richard's observations. Was there something developing between her and Arthur? The thought seemed absurd. He was older, still grieving, and they'd met under the most extraordinary circumstances. Yet she couldn't deny the quiet understanding that had grown between them, the easy way he'd transitioned from gruff reluctance to gentle interaction with her children, the moments when their eyes met in silent communication across the room. After tucking the children in, Jenna lingered in the hallway, drawn to the soft murmur of voices from the study below, curiosity overcoming propriety. She descended the stairs quietly, pausing outside the partially open door. "I can arrange suitable employment in Mayfield," Richard was saying. "Consulting work, security assessment, something that would utilize your skills without requiring public attention. You think I should leave the mansion?" Arthur's voice held surprise. "After all these years, I think you should consider living again, not just existing," Richard replied gently. "The debt I owe you can never be repaid, Arthur, but I can offer you a chance at a new beginning." "In the same town where she's headed," Arthur observed, his tone unreadable. "Scout chose her for a reason," Richard said simply. "I've learned to trust his judgment in these matters. She has her own life, Rich. A career, children to raise. The last thing she needs is a broken-down ex-detective with a tragic past. That's not for you to decide, Richard countered. Besides, you're more than your past, Arthur. You always have been. A long silence followed, during which Jenna contemplated retreating upstairs. Before she could move, Arthur spoke again, his voice softer, more vulnerable than she'd heard before. I don't know if I remember how to be part of a family anymore. You never forgot, Richard assured him. I saw you with those children today. The man who taught Claire to ride a bike and build sandcastles is still in there. Jenna backed away silently, unwilling to eavesdrop further on such a personal conversation. As she turned, she found Scout watching her from the top of the stairs, his intelligent eyes reflecting understanding beyond his canine nature. You planned this all along, didn't you? She whispered to the dog as she climbed the stairs. Scout merely wagged his tail once, then led the way back to the children's room. That night, Jenna lay awake, her mind racing with the implications of Richard's words and her own conflicted feelings. By the time dawn broke, she had reached a decision, one that surprised her with its clarity and rightness. At breakfast, she found all three men in the kitchen, Richard cooking, Arthur setting the table, and Scout supervising from his spot near the window. The domesticity of the scene made her smile. Good morning, Richard greeted warmly. Sleep well? Yes, thank you, Jenna replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Arthur with a smile that he cautiously returned. The children bounded in moments later, immediately gravitating toward Scout for their morning cuddle. The dog received their attention regally, as if it were his natural due. As they ate, Richard updated them on the case against Mercer. Overnight, federal agents had executed coordinated raids across 3 states, arresting key members of Mercer's organization. Mercer himself had been apprehended attempting to flee the country. It's over, Richard concluded, his gaze on Arthur. Really over this time? Arthur nodded once, the significance of the moment reflected in his eyes. Laura and Claire can rest now, he said softly. After breakfast, Richard announced he had business to attend to, the complex process of transitioning from his undercover identity back to a new legitimate one. Before leaving, he knelt to say goodbye to Emily and Ben, thanking them for bringing joy back to his home. Will we see you again? Emily asked directly. Richard smiled. I believe you will, young lady, sooner than you might think. To Jenna, he simply said, trust your instincts, with a meaningful glance toward Arthur. After Richard's departure, Arthur retreated to the study, presumably to process the whirlwind of revelations and emotions from the past 24 hours. Jenna took the opportunity to take the children outside, where the bright winter sunshine had begun to melt the top layer of snow into a perfect consistency for snowball fights and snow angels. Scout joined them, his golden form bounding joyfully through the drifts, occasionally pausing to check on Arthur through the study window, as if ensuring his charge was still processing events in a healthy manner. It was mid-afternoon when Arthur finally emerged, his expression calmer than Jenna had yet seen it. He watched the children's play for a few moments before approaching Jenna where she sat on a garden bench. Richard tells me the road should be clear by evening, he said, sitting beside her. Your car has been repaired and will be delivered here around 6. That's good news, Jenna replied, though her tone lacked conviction. Arthur studied her profile. You don't sound particularly enthusiastic. Jenna turned to face him, deciding that directness was the only approach that made sense after everything they'd experienced. I've been thinking, she began carefully, about Mayfield, about our next steps. And, Arthur prompted when she hesitated, the job in Mayfield is a good opportunity, but not a unique one. With my qualifications, I could find a teaching position in many places. Arthur's expression revealed nothing, but his posture had grown very still. What are you saying, Jenna? I'm saying that my children feel safe here, safer than they've felt in months. I'm saying that in 3 days, this place has begun to feel more like home than anywhere we've lived recently. She took a deep breath. And I'm saying that I think Scout brought us here for a reason beyond just helping you and Richard resolve your past. Richard mentioned that he's offered me a consulting position in Mayfield, Arthur said slowly. I know, Jenna admitted. I overheard part of your conversation last night. A faint smile touched Arthur's lips. The detective and the eavesdropper. We make quite a pair. We could, Jenna agreed softly, if you wanted to try. Arthur's gaze moved to Emily and Ben, now engaged in teaching Scout to pull them on a makeshift sled. You hardly know me, he pointed out, and I come with considerable baggage. We all have baggage, Jenna countered. Mine includes an emotionally manipulative ex-husband and trust issues that could fill a book. She reached out tentatively, placing her hand over his. But I also know that connections like the one we've formed in these past days don't happen often. That there's something worth exploring here, if you're willing. Arthur turned his hand over, his fingers closing gently around hers. The touch was warm, steady, comforting in its simplicity. I haven't considered a future beyond justice for Laura and Claire in 5 years, he admitted. I'm not sure I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together, Jenna suggested. Day by day, they sat in companionable silence, watching the children play with Scout in the winter sunshine. The dog, seemingly aware of the moment unfolding on the bench, glanced their way with what Jenna could have sworn was satisfaction in his intelligent eyes. Scout approves, Arthur observed with dry humor. Scout orchestrated, Jenna corrected, smiling. According to Richard, anyway. Arthur's expression grew thoughtful. Rich always said Scout could see things we couldn't. Connections, possibilities, the goodness in people. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. Maybe he saw a possibility for us before we did. I'd like to find out, Jenna said simply. In response, Arthur raised their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in a gesture so unexpectedly tender that Jenna felt tears spring to her eyes. So would I, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. From across the snowy expanse, Scout barked once, a sound of unmistakable approval that made them both laugh, breaking the intensity of the moment with welcome lightness. A new beginning, Jenna thought, watching her children's faces glow with joy and health. Not what she had planned, certainly not what she had expected when their car broke down in the blizzard, but perhaps exactly what they all needed. And as Scout bounded over to them, golden in the winter light, she couldn't help but wonder if the remarkable dog had known it all along. Act 5. A New Beginning. 95. 0. 115. 0. Spring came to the mountains in a gentle tide of green, melting the last of the snow and coaxing tentative buds from what had been barren branches. The transformation of the landscape mirrored the change within the mansion itself, which had awakened from its long winter of grief into something vibrant and alive. 3 months had passed since the night Scout led a freezing family to shelter. 3 months since Richard Kensington returned from the dead. 3 months since Arthur Langley found justice for his murdered family and, unexpectedly, a reason to embrace life again. Jenna stood on the mansion's wide terrace, watching Emily and Ben race across the newly revealed lawn with Scout bounding joyfully between them. The sound of their laughter carried on the spring breeze, intermingling with birdsong and the distant murmur of the stream swollen with snowmelt. Penny, for your thoughts? Arthur's voice came from behind her, followed by the gentle pressure of his hands on her shoulders. She leaned back against him, smiling, just appreciating the view, and thinking about how much has changed since winter. Having second thoughts? Arthur asked, the question light but with an undercurrent of genuine concern. Jenna turned to face him, taking in the remarkable transformation 3 months had wrought. The perpetual tension he'd carried had eased, the defensive shell cracked to reveal the man beneath. He smiled more now, small expressions at first, as if remembering how the muscles worked, then gradually fuller and more frequent until they became a natural part of his demeanor. Not a single one, she assured him. This was the right decision for all of us. The decision to stay had evolved naturally after their conversation in the snow. Jenna had contacted the school in Mayfield, explaining that unexpected circumstances required her to decline the position. Then, with Arthur's help and Richard's considerable behind-the-scenes influence, she'd secured a teaching role at the small local school 20 minutes from the mansion. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Emily and Ben had needed time to adjust to a new school mid-year. Arthur had struggled initially with the sudden immersion into family life after years of solitude. Jenna herself had battled moments of doubt, wondering if she'd been reckless in changing their plans so dramatically based on a connection formed under extraordinary circumstances. But Scout, as always, had seemed to understand what they all needed before they did themselves. The golden retriever had appointed himself guardian of their fledgling family unit, sleeping outside the children's rooms, accompanying Jenna on her commute to school, and remaining a steady presence for Arthur during moments when the weight of the past threatened to overwhelm the promise of the future. Richard called while you were getting the kids from school, Arthur said, joining her at the terrace railing. The final sentencing for Mercer came through today. Multiple life terms, no possibility of parole. Jenna squeezed his hand. How do you feel about that? Arthur considered the question thoughtfully. 5 months ago, I would have said it wasn't enough, that nothing short of Mercer's death could balance what he took from me. His gaze drifted to the children playing below. Now, I find myself grateful that the legal system worked as it should, that justice was served without more bloodshed. Laura and Claire would be proud of you, Jenna said softly, knowing he could now hear their names without flinching. I think they would, Arthur agreed, the acceptance in his voice marking another milestone in his healing. Richard suggested we plant a memorial garden for them this summer, something beautiful that keeps their memory alive without enshrining grief. I think that's a wonderful idea, Jenna said, imagining a space filled with flowers and light, a stark contrast to the cold granite of a traditional memorial. He also mentioned he's finalizing the paperwork for his new identity. Daniel Foster, semi-retired investment consultant. A hint of the old wry humor touched Arthur's expression. Apparently, I'm to be introduced as his longtime associate if anyone asks. Will he be living here? Jenna asked, curious about the arrangement that had been evolving over the past months. Arthur shook his head. He's purchased a smaller property about 10 miles away. Says this place is ours now. Yours, mine, the children's. Scout's too, of course. Of course, Jenna agreed with a smile, watching the dog orchestrate some elaborate game that had both children giggling uncontrollably. He's the real head of the household, after all. Their conversation was interrupted by the children calling from below, urging them to come down and see Scout's newest trick. Hand in hand, they descended the terrace steps to the lawn where Emily, Ben, and Scout waited expectantly. "Watch this," Ben exclaimed, then turned to the dog. "Scout, find Mommy's keys." Without hesitation, Scout trotted into the house through the open French doors, returning moments later with Jenna's key ring carefully held in his mouth. "That's very impressive," Jenna acknowledged, taking the keys and rewarding Scout with a scratch behind his ears. "Though I hope you're not teaching him to fetch things that aren't his." "Mr. Richard says Scout always knows what belongs to who," Emily explained importantly. "He says Scout has a special sense about people and their things." "Mr. Richard is right about that," Arthur agreed, his tone warm with affection for both the mentioned man and the remarkable dog. The mention of Richard reminded Jenna of the letter that had arrived that morning, an official-looking envelope from the county clerk's office. She'd set it aside to deal with after school, but the busy afternoon had pushed it from her mind until now. "Speaking of belonging," she said, "we should check that letter from the county. It might be about the property transfer Richard mentioned." They made their way inside, the children racing ahead with Scout while Jenna and Arthur followed at a more measured pace. The mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum to Jenna now hummed with life. Children's artwork adorning previously austere walls, modern comforts integrated among the antique furnishings, flowers from the garden brightening windowsills. In the study that had once been Richard's sanctuary and later Arthur's isolation chamber, Jenna retrieved the envelope from her bag. Arthur watched as she opened it, his expression curious. "It's the deed," she confirmed, scanning the document. "Richard has transferred ownership of the mansion and grounds to—" She paused, surprised. "To both of us." "Jointly," Arthur nodded slowly. "He mentioned he was considering that arrangement, said the house needed both of us, my connection to its past and your vision for its future." "That's a lot of responsibility," Jenna observed, still absorbing the implications of owning such a significant property with Arthur. "Too much?" he asked carefully. Jenna considered the question, looking around at the room that had witnessed so much of their shared story, from discovering Richard's journal to their first honest conversations about loss and possibility. "No," she decided, setting the deed on the desk. "It feels right, actually. This place brought us together. Now we get to decide what it becomes next." Arthur's smile reached his eyes, the shadows that had haunted them for so long now replaced by a cautious hope. "And what would you like it to become?" "A real home," Jenna replied without hesitation. "One where the children can grow up feeling safe and loved, where we can build something lasting together." She hesitated, then added softly, "Where maybe, eventually, our family might expand." Arthur's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper. "You want more children?" "I'm open to the possibility," Jenna admitted. "If that's something you might want too, someday." Before Arthur could respond, Scout padded into the study, followed by Emily and Ben, who had changed into their play clothes. The dog carried something in his mouth, a small velvet box that Jenna didn't recognize. "Scout found this in your drawer," Emily announced innocently. "He was very insistent about bringing it out." Arthur's face registered shock, followed by resignation and finally amusement. "I see Scout has decided on the timing," he said dryly, accepting the box from the dog's gentle mouth. "Timing for what?" Jenna asked, though a fluttering suspicion had already taken root in her chest. Rather than answering directly, Arthur turned to the children. "Would you two be okay with your mom and me making our family official?" he asked, his tone serious but gentle. "With me becoming part of your family permanently?" Emily's eyes widened in understanding. "You mean like getting married?" "Exactly like that," Arthur confirmed. "If your mom agrees, of course." Ben considered this with the directness of a 5-year-old. "Would you be our dad then?" "Not to replace your father," Arthur clarified carefully, "but as another person who loves you and wants to help take care of you, like an extra dad. I think that would be good," Ben decided after a moment's thought. "Scout likes you a lot, and he's a very good judge of character." "High praise indeed," Arthur smiled, then turned to Emily for her verdict. The 7-year-old studied him with surprising maturity. "You make Mom happy," she observed, "and you tell good stories, and you never yell even when you're upset." "I vote yes." Arthur's expression softened with gratitude before he finally turned to Jenna, who had watched the exchange with growing emotion. "I had planned to do this more formally," he admitted, opening the velvet box to reveal a vintage engagement ring with a modest diamond flanked by sapphires. "It was my grandmother's. Not particularly valuable, but well loved." "It's beautiful," Jenna whispered, tears threatening. Arthur took her hand, his own remarkably steady. I know our beginning was unusual, that most people would say 3 months is too soon to make this kind of commitment, but I think when you've experienced the kind of loss we both have, you learn to recognize genuine connection when it finds you. He drew a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. Jenna Miller, you and your children brought life back into this house and into my heart when I thought both were beyond saving. I love you, and I love Emily and Ben. I want to spend whatever time we have building a family together, if you'll have me. Jenna was vaguely aware of the children watching with wide eyes and Scout sitting at attention, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, anticipatory strokes. But mostly she saw Arthur, the man who had opened his home to strangers in a storm, who had shared his painful past and embraced the possibility of a new future, who had shown her children kindness and patience when they needed it most. Yes, she said simply, joy rising through her like spring sap in winter-dormant trees. Yes, I'll have you. Arthur's smile bloomed full and unrestrained as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Before he could rise from his kneeling position, both children launched themselves at him in exuberant hugs that nearly toppled him backward. Scout joined the celebration, barking happily and circling the group with obvious approval. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the excitement had settled into a comfortable glow, Jenna and Arthur sat on the terrace watching the stars emerge above the mountains. Scout lay at their feet, his golden head resting contentedly on his paws. "Did you plan to propose today?" Jenna asked, admiring how the vintage ring caught the soft outdoor lighting. Arthur chuckled. "I've had the ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I thought perhaps this weekend, during our picnic by the lake." He glanced down at Scout with mock accusation. Someone had other ideas. "Scout always knows best," Jenna teased, leaning against Arthur's shoulder. "Richard swears Scout has some kind of sixth sense," Arthur reflected, "that he sees connections and possibilities invisible to humans. After everything that's happened, I'm inclined to believe him." "I was thinking," Jenna said after a comfortable silence, "about what to tell people when they ask how we met. The truth sounds like something from a novel. Perhaps we simply say a mutual friend introduced us," Arthur suggested, stroking Scout's golden fur with his free hand. "It's not entirely inaccurate." Jenna smiled at the understatement. "A mutual friend who saved my family from freezing to death, led us to your doorstep, helped solve a 5-year mystery, and then decided we should get married. When you put it that way, it sounds rather far-fetched," Arthur admitted, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Though Richard would argue that's exactly the kind of quiet miracle Scout has always specialized in. As if acknowledging his central role in their story, Scout raised his head, his intelligent eyes moving between them with unmistakable satisfaction before he settled back into his comfortable position. "Do you think he knew all along?" Jenna wondered. "From that first night in the storm, was he already planning this?" She gestured between them and at the mansion now transformed into their shared home. "I've stopped questioning Scout's intentions," Arthur replied with affectionate resignation. "But yes, I suspect he recognized something in you, in all three of you, that I needed before I knew it myself." The spring night enveloped them in gentle darkness, the mansion's warm light spilling out onto the terrace like a beacon in the wilderness. From somewhere in the surrounding forest came the soft hooting of an owl, while inside, their children slept peacefully in rooms that had once known only silence and grief. "I never expected this," Jenna confessed softly. "When we left our old life behind, I thought the best I could hope for was safety and stability for the children. I never imagined finding a home," Arthur finished when she trailed off. "A partnership, a chance to build something new from the broken pieces of what came before." "All of that," Jenna agreed, turning her face up to his. "Thank you for letting us in that night." "Thanks, Scout," Arthur corrected gently. "I was ready to send you right back into the storm." "Well then," Jenna amended, leaning down to stroke the dog's silky ears. "Thank you, Scout, for your extraordinary intuition and stubborn insistence." Scout thumped his tail once against the terrace floor in acknowledgement, his eyes closed in contentment. As Arthur's arm tightened around her shoulders, Jenna reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led them to this moment. A desperate flight from an unhappy past, a near-fatal encounter with nature's fury, rescue by a remarkable dog, and the discovery of a haven that had become home. Life rarely followed the paths one expected, she realized. Sometimes a wrong turn, a broken-down car, a raging storm could lead to exactly where you were meant to be all along, and sometimes it took the wisdom of a golden-hearted dog to recognize the possibilities that humans, with all their complexities and fears, might otherwise miss. Inside the mansion that had witnessed so much pain and renewal, two children who had known instability now slept secure in the knowledge of being cherished. Outside, beneath the vast canopy of stars, two adults who had experienced profound loss embraced the unexpected gift of a second chance. And between them, Scout, loyal conscience, guardian angel in canine form, kept watch, his mission beautifully, perfectly complete. The following weekend, Richard came to dinner, his new identity as Daniel Foster sitting comfortably on his shoulders. He brought gifts for the children and a bottle of champagne to celebrate the engagement, but his eyes lit most brightly at the sight of Scout greeting him at the door with unmistakable joy. "You've done well, old friend," Jenna overheard him murmuring to the dog as they walked in the garden after dinner. "Better than I could have imagined." Scout pranced alongside his original master with obvious pride, occasionally glancing back to ensure his new family was still within sight. That night, as the household settled into peaceful slumber, Jenna paused by the window of the master bedroom, gazing out at the moonlit mountains. Arthur joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Admiring the view again?" he asked softly. "Admiring our life," Jenna corrected, "and thinking about how close we came to never finding it." "Scout wouldn't have allowed that," Arthur replied with absolute conviction. "He would have found another way to bring us together." As if summoned by their conversation, Scout appeared in the doorway, checking on them one final time before retiring to his self-appointed post outside the children's rooms. "Good night, Guardian," Jenna called softly to him. "And thank you." Scout wagged his tail once in acknowledgement before padding away down the hallway, his golden form catching the moonlight like a promise made visible, of protection, of connection, and of the extraordinary power of love to transform lives when it arrives in unexpected packages. Outside, the spring wind carried the scent of new beginnings through the mountains, while inside, a family born of chance, choice, and a remarkable dog's intervention rested secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. Life often leads us down unexpected paths, doesn't it? Just like Jenna and her children, we sometimes find ourselves facing what seems like an impossible situation, only to discover it's actually leading us towards something extraordinary. I'd love to know what you thought about Scout's remarkable ability to bring these broken people together. Do you believe some animals have a special intuition about people and their needs? Have you ever experienced an unexpected meeting or event that changed the course of your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories of unexpected blessings, fateful encounters, or even the special animals that have touched your life. Your experience might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. And before you go, what was your favorite moment in Scout's journey to create this new family? Thank you for joining us for this journey through loss, discovery, and renewal. Until our next story, remember that even in your darkest storm, an unexpected guide might be leading you exactly where you need to go.